So we learned last week that Wells Fargo was going to be hit with a 185, I believe, $1 million fine from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. The CFPB is the agency that Elizabeth Warren helped institute to protect consumers. Exactly what it says. They found, and an investigation found into Wells Fargo, that over 2 million accounts were created fraudulently, credit card accounts and bank accounts. And they were created without the permission of the person whose name they created it in. And so by creating these accounts, they were able to charge fees. They were able to charge all sorts of fines and penalties because of the maintenance or late fees. And they were able to use that to meet their quota. And this was a widespread issue. This was not just a one-off. This happened with a total of 5,300 employees. And those 5,300, or at least 5,300 that were fired for participating in this massive fraud. That was last week. This week, it came to our attention that the woman on your screen, whose name is Carrie Tolstedt, who was the executive over this division, received a $125, I believe it was $124.6 million golden parachute to retire, even though she was the executive over this division, the division that saw over 2 million fraudulent accounts made. And those accounts were made so that those employees can meet their sales quota. So while shareholders in Wells Fargo are going to have to foot the bill of this $185 million fine, and while 5,300 employees are being fired, and rightfully so, for their participation in this fraud, the person who was responsible, where the buck should have ultimately stopped, parachuted out with a $124.6 million severance package. Not severance package, but golden parachute retirement. Now, there's some statements from the CEO who said that basically at the time of Carrie Tolstedt's retirement, that she was the standard bearer of the culture there at Wells Fargo, and that she was a tremendous asset and a person who focused on the well-being of the customer. This is what he said upon her retirement. The problem is that she is responsible for the culture. If she is the standard bearer of the culture, she is also responsible for the culture. And the CEO of Wells Fargo has subsequently come out and said that the widespread corruption that crossed over 5,300 employees was only something that could be held or laid at the feet of those employees. In other words, it was those 5,300 employees and nobody else. In other words, don't look at anybody else. Don't look at the CEO. Don't look at Carrie Tolstedt. Don't look at her retirement package. Don't look at her golden parachute. Don't look at the fact that just a month before he said that she was the standard bearer of the culture. Forget about that. The only people responsible for this system-wide corruption and fraud are the people who were involved in it. And isn't that just like that's a tad bit ironic? Right? So that if there's a victory to be had, then of course the executives are going to take credit for it, because so long as everyone knew or did not know about this, then the CEO would say of Carrie Tolstedt that she's the standard bearer of our culture. But as soon as it was revealed that 5,300 employees, which represents 1% of their total employee base, 5,300 employees were involved in systematic corruption and fraud, then all of a sudden, no, it's just those 5,300 employees. Don't look at anyone else. Don't look at the culture. Don't look at the management. Don't look at the executive. It's just those 5,300 people we fired. Now, Carrie Tolstedt, she was responsible for over 94,000 employees. And so 5,300 represents about just under 6% of her entire employee base. However, I don't know if you've ever worked in corporate America. Most of you probably do. The culture is set by leadership. Leadership is responsible for what happens underneath them. And this is something, this corruption, actually, this fraud, the reason given by many of these employees was that they were trying to meet these quotas, these end of the month, these quarterly requirements, sales figures that they had to meet. And because of the culture and the pressure that was placed on them, they began to fraudulently open up accounts. Now, this is in no way, means, forms, or fashion to absolve them of their responsibility. In fact, there should be a lot more done than people just being fired. But it's amazing to me that the person who's ultimately responsible for this department not only is not being held accountable for it, but is also being rewarded for it. While not only the employees involved are being fired, not only will Wells Fargo have to pay a $185 million fine, but the shareholders, the people to whom she was ultimately accountable, they also are going to bear the brunt of her leadership. Not to mention the millions of people who were defrauded. It's mighty convenient that when something goes right, we're able to give all the credit to leadership. And then when something goes wrong, leadership says, I didn't know anything about it. But ultimately, that's what has happened. And so an update to the story just today, Wells Fargo has determined, because of the backlash, because of the investigations that have been called for, because of and this reporting came from Fortune.com and FinancialTimes.com and a website called ZeroHedge.com did some fabulous reporting on this. Because of the reporting and because of the massive backlash overnight since yesterday, Wells Fargo has determined that it would eliminate all product sales goals in retail banking starting next year. And it was those retail sales goals that pushed those 5,300 people to do whatever they could to meet those goals, because of the culture and the pressure placed on them to hit those goals. And since Carrie, according to the CEO, was the standard bearer of the culture, I just believe that she should hold some accountability for their actions, not their actions. Let me correct myself. She should hold accountability for the culture that fostered fraudulent actions. And if nobody else she should be held accountable to, she should be held accountable to the shareholders who are going to take this $185 million hit, as well as the 2 million customers who were defrauded because of the culture that she was, of which she was the standard bearer. Just fascinating story. And we'll see what happens. Let's keep an eye on it, because there are investigations that have been called for, and we'll see what becomes of it.